Hey, this is Let It Fee, and I'm Vanessa. This is a channel where I talk about music and whatever I feel like. So if that sounds interesting to you. Stick around. So I've been a collector for probably about 30 years, if you count like the cassettes I had as a kid, and then moving into CDs and then into collecting records. And I've acquired a lot over the years. I have about 500 records, 1,500 CDs, and I still have some cassettes, but I'm not as focused on that. Those are just sort of relics from the past. So this first series I'm going to start off with is called Should It Stay or Should It Go? It's where I take a look at albums in my collection that I question whether or not I need to own. So maybe I bought them without hearing them, which is usually the case. Maybe I bought them because I just didn't want to leave empty-handed when I was at the thrift store or at the record store or wherever. Or maybe it's just something I thought I would like more than I actually did. The idea, though, is to actually give it a closer look, a fresh assessment, fresh listen, and just make sure that I don't make any rash decisions. Because for years, I've wanted to hold on to everything, and I'm running out of space. And it just does not seem to be in my best interest anymore to keep things I don't really want. So, this is just a way to kind of look at it from a different perspective and get rid of some of that stuff I don't need so I can fill those spaces with things I actually want. So the first album I'm going to start with is the self-titled album from 1980 by the Flying Lizards. Um, it has a unique cover for the Canadian edition, and I cannot find anywhere as to why. I went online, I looked all through Google and even on Wikipedia, they don't even mention the fact that it has a different cover in Canada. Like usually they'll have an alternate cover if there is one on the page for the album, but they don't for this album. So if anybody watching knows why this album has its own unique cover in Canada only, I would be very interested to find out. Anyway, so I bought this album, I would say like 6 or 7 years ago. I was at this record seller in my hometown. They sell records out of like a bakery. It's like a side business, and they're usually pretty cheap. And they usually have some things that are a little different because the tastes in my hometown, they go towards more classic things generally. So anything that's a little out there, you can find there. And I found some cool stuff, but also found some stuff that I probably didn't need to buy. So I only knew their cover of Money when I bought the album, and I thought that maybe the album would be cool, maybe be interesting. I don't know what it was that drew me to buy this particular album because I really knew nothing else about it. And I remember actually listening to it when I got it and being just super disappointed, like it was not what I thought it was going to be, which I'm not even really sure what I thought it was going to be, but I remember being bored and just being like, well, this is disappointing. And then I just never listened to it again. And in my memory of it, it was just like mostly this ambient music, and that was it. And then money, which is not correct. Going back to it, I was not remembering it very well, but it is still not something that I'm going to listen to regularly. It's experimental and atmospheric a lot of the time. It's very dub influenced. It starts with this really off-putting song. It's called the Mandalay song, which is actually a cover. I did not realize that until I did some more research, but it's super off-putting, shrill vocals, like this polka-esque rhythm, which I don't know, like if they were just trying to test the listener right off the bat with this album, but it would not entice a lot of people to keep listening. It is kind of an anomaly on the album, but it's a pretty weird way to open your album. So it gives you an idea that this is going to be something that is not your usual type of thing. Throughout the first side, there's some interesting grooves. They're very dub influenced. like a lot of the post-punk new wave kind of stuff was at the time. And they like to put little sounds like little weird vocal inflections or like off-putting noises like random tuba sounds and like this guitar that's a little like it's just not pretty, which that's not the point. It's not supposed to be. But it sort of screams like this is experimental and this is wacky. Just, like that's what they're trying to do and sometimes it's too much. It just didn't really interest me as much. And then we get into the covers, which I guess were the singles. Um, First, they do Summertime Blues at the end of side one, which I think sucks. It's terrible. It's kind of deconstructed similarly to that Money cover that everybody remembers better, but it works a lot better with Money than it does with Summertime Blues, I think. So after a bit of like a sort of repetitive, boring stuff in the side one, but also like quirky and experimental. We end with this terrible cover of Summertime Blues. And then we open side two with the Money cover, which probably is the best song on the album. Probably because the original composition is such a great song and they managed to make it catchy and quirky. And I think it all works for that one song. Not enough for me to love the rest of the album, but it is a highlight, I think. And then the majority of side two is where I get into that. It's instrumental and it's just kind of repetitive and not necessarily ambient, but like it's droning and kind of just keeps going on. It's like there's some interesting melodic synth hooks here and there, but then they repeat and they get old, and it's just that is what I was remembering of the album when I was thinking back to it was those three songs, I think. And one song, actually, Trouble, reminds me of the instrumental to Mexican Radio by Wall of Voodoo, which is interesting because this came first. So I don't know if they were inspired by that or if it was just a coincidence. That's kind of interesting. The closing track, The Window, is definitely one of the better originals. It's got that dub influence again, and it has vocals again, but it actually feels somewhat like a song, whereas a lot of the other stuff does not. And it's really, I think, more what I expected this album to be like when I bought it. It's, you know, it's interesting, it's quirky. It kind of reminds me of the Raincoats a little bit. But it comes too late to save this album for me. Like it leaves things on a good note, but it it does even still unravel into being boring and repetitive in the end, and it does overstay its welcome, despite the fact it's the best original song. So this album is just it ultimately fits with the stuff happening at that time. At times it reminds me of some of their contemporaries, and in even some cases artists that come after, but lacking the aspects that make those our other artists memorable or successful. And all I remembered from this album is those ambient kind of monotonous tracks, which that is not really a good sign for the rest of it. And yeah, coming back to this, it showed me that my impression of the album was wrong in some ways, but it didn't change my mind. It's not an album I need to own. I gave it 2 stars. I wouldn't say I hate it. I wouldn't say I like it at all, but I am never going to listen to this. Like, it's not something that I need to take up space with. It's not something I'm going to put on. So, yeah, it's time for it to leave my collection. And hopefully it'll find its way to someone who appreciates it more. I don't know how sought after this Flying Lizards debut is with a Canadian cover. It doesn't seem to go for a lot on Discogs. It doesn't seem like it fetches any big amount of money or anything. But at the end of the day, getting rid of it serves my purpose anyway, regardless of what I get in exchange for it. So yeah, it's time for the Flying Lizards to fly out of my collection. So yeah, so sometimes you take a chance on something and it just doesn't work out. So that's what this is for me to finally go through all of these failed experiments and move on, make space for the things that I want, make space for the things that I love. because what is a collection if it's just a bunch of stuff, you know? Like it should say something about your taste. It should say something about um the stuff that you love and it yeah. So, yeah, there's a ton of things I can go through. So there will be lots of these if it works out. So, yeah. Let me know about some albums in your collection that you think maybe you could reassess and possibly get rid of, because you know what? We don't have to keep everything we've ever bought. I know that there's always such a priority put on like just having tons of albums and just having everything possible, but you know what? We don't need it if it's not something we love. If you're never going to put it on and you have no other attachment to it, what's the point? So, yeah, maybe it's time that we all looked at what we have and see if maybe we need to keep it. Anyway, till next time, see you later.